Hi everyone, this is SWRPG Guides, and I'm here bringing you a guide on how to deal with difficult players as a GM. And this is a topic that I thought was really important to go over, and it was something that I had spoke to another GM that is in my Discord server that I have, and he's actually someone who I'm hoping to bring into the channel maybe a little bit later on, and we talked about this a little bit. So I thought it's just really good to go over this topic as a GM, because this is probably the number one thing that I struggle with, is dealing with difficult players and these types that I've listed here. So I put down 3 different types of players. There are definitely going to be many other types, but I thought these kind of covered some of the main problems you might deal with as a GM. And before we go into it, I just want to say, I don't want to put any offense on anyone. I guarantee when you're watching this, there are going to be certain traits that you will notice that maybe you do as a player. And I can tell you right now, I have done probably most, if not all of these things on this list at some point as a player. So I don't want anyone to take offense or anything like that. This is really just kind of like a learning experience, how to help deal with these types of situations. So the language I use might be a little strong, but it's just to kind of get my point across as to why players might do these types of things and how you can deal with it. So I do hope you enjoy the guide, and we will start out with the first type of difficult player, and this is the murder hobo, and this is someone that, or a type of player that I've definitely had to deal with in the past, kind of recently actually. So, murder hobos. So what I've done as kind of the setup for each of these types of players, I've put in, what the problem is with this type of playing, what's the reason that these players are doing this, why it sucks, so why it can affect the group, and why other players might not like this type of play style, and then finally, how as a GM can you control it, or at least help to address it. Maybe you can't control it, but you can kind of have a conversation about it. So murder hobos. The problem with murder hobos as a player is they are always looking to kill any NPC that they come across. They are kind of obsessed with combat and killing things. This is especially true if any conflict arises. It's almost like a defense mechanism or a coping strategy, if you will, for players. Any time a problem comes up, they just kind of revert to, I need to just kill this person and it'll take care of it. So they usually resort to wanting to win the situation, and they do this by just killing people. And I think another good thing to note is that they will often kill other NPCs or other players even, just as an excuse not to have to roleplay, because maybe they're not comfortable with it. So that goes into kind of the reason for this. So these players usually aren't very strong at role-playing, so they make up for it by using their combat skills. And they may also go into a session with just a chaotic evil mindset and are looking to just toy with whatever the GM has set up. Maybe they want to even mess with the group. This could either be intentional or not intentional. Maybe they went into it saying, I want to be chaotic evil. And so now they're really sticking to that, and it's having a very negative effect on the rest of the group. I think just before we go into, how to deal with this as a GM, right away, one thing that you can do to prevent this is just to say no chaotic evil characters. That's a good way, and that's something that I've done before. Just kind of leave out chaotic evil if you don't want to have to deal with someone who's just undermining a campaign or a session. So that's a good way to start. Why this sucks? The reason is that other players in the groups will now be forced to deal with the consequences of what this character is doing, because if you are killing people all the time, there's going to be some major consequences. And if you as a GM are not creating consequences for this, they're just going to keep doing it more and more, because they're learning that now I don't have to worry about killing people. I can do whatever I want. So you're basically dragging the entire group along with you for the ride when you are a murder hobo. And then another thing that I've noticed that groups will do is they will oftentimes adjust or adapt their gameplay to fit the person who is the murder hobos. So they may now also become murder hobos because they're realizing it's the only way that they can play. They're not able to have those role-playing opportunities, because if they try to do that, the other player's just going to kill them. So this is a really big problem. It's something that would not recommend anyone do if you're able to prevent it. If you are going to play chaotic evil, do it in a role-playing sense. Be evil and cunning rather than just a murderer. That's, I think, a big distinction that you can use if you want to be chaotic evil. There's nothing wrong with killing someone here and there, but if you're going to do it every time, it just ruins the entire session. So, and again, it ruins the role-playing opportunities for other players, and especially if a player, wants to enjoy the storyline or they want to create a fun story. Murder hobos are just shutting that down, basically, and they're not allowing for that storytelling to occur. So, how do you deal with this as a GM? I think if the entire group is reverting to this type of playstyle, it's important to address the entire group and just kind of let them know, like, hey, I've noticed that you guys are killing a lot of the NPCs that I'm putting out there, and I'd really prefer if you don't do that because it is affecting the storyline. Just kind of just put it out there, just let them know that there's a problem. Or you can also just tell the one player individually who maybe is causing the most problem with it that they need to stop killing everything. It's ruining the story. Another option, if maybe you don't want to make the person feel bad or kind of, single anyone out, you could just create some very strong NPCs that they are unable to kill. This is something that I had to do with a group that I have been GMing with. Basically, just throw some really strong enemies out there, and you're basically just making a statement like, if this is what you guys are going to do, if you're going to go ahead and murder everything, then I'm going to react with just coming at you with really difficult NPCs. So that is another tactic you can use. It'll kind of put them in their place a little bit, and you're doing it without kind of explicitly saying like, hey, don't do this. So, and then other than that, you can also just, let's say you are in a situation with an NPC, you're role-playing, you're trying to create, some fun opportunities for the players to have conversation, and let's say one player is like, they decide to pull out their, a knife or something and put it up to their neck. Just have the NPC kind of walk away from the situation, abandon any storyline that may have been explored from that. I will even if it's like a main storyline that I'm pursuing as a GM, I'll just abandon it, or I'll just have them walk away and be like, hey, if this is how you want to deal with people, then this is going to be the reaction. And I think it's important to kind of make the parallels to reality, because even though this is a fantasy game, it should be based in some reality. There should be realistic, social expectations. You can't, in the real life, you can't just go around murdering people and putting knives up to people's necks. You will get arrested and you will be, put in prison. So kind of letting them know that is important. And finally, the last thing that you can do is if let's say the entire group really just wants to focus on combat and kill stuff, create an Age of Rebellion campaign, which is focused on the Galactic Civil War, and just have it combat heavy. So, let them do their thing. If that's what they want to do, let them do it. So, I think that's a good way to deal with this type of character. So, again, any players who have done this in the past, I'm not trying to make you all feel guilty. I've definitely done stuff like this before. So, just kind of things to keep in mind, So that's the Murder Hobo overview. The next is the Designated Leader. This is probably my least favorite player to deal with. This is probably also the player type that I am the opposite of. I really dislike this type of player. So just to get that out there, and we'll kind of go into why I think it's really, really not a good way to play. It's probably the worst way to play, in my opinion. So, the problem with the Designated Leader. These players feel that it's their job to lead the group in every situation. Anytime that the GM asks a question or provides an opportunity for role-playing, they are always the first to butt in with a response. They're kind of like waiting on the edge of their seat for the GM to finish talking so that they can jump in with a response. And I'm sure you all have experienced this before. It does happen quite a bit. So what's the reason that players play like this? So, players who decide to be the designated leader of the group are often really knowledgeable and experienced with the game or the subject matter. So they just want to show off their skills by being the leader. They are also probably control freaks and feel that the only way that they can enjoy the story is if it centers around them. So it is kind of like a narcissistic play style, very selfish, and it's also being kind of ignorant of the other players, or negligent, really. So another big reason that this might happen is if, let's say, the other players in the group are either new, or they're just, maybe shy, introverted people, so they're not used to or comfortable with role playing. Let's say you start the session off with a really awkward silence. The designated leader might now decide, like, hey, if no one else is going to talk, I'm going to do all the talking, and that's kind of how the rest of the session will play out. So that is, and that's understandable. If you are playing, you want to have fun, you want to make sure that it is engaging, and a cool story. You are basically saying, like, well, I'm going to help provide that because I want to make sure this isn't boring, no one's talking, I want to have fun. So that's kind of their side of it, the designated leader, and I understand that for sure. But this is the reason why it sucks. So this type of playstyle makes the other players feel like they can't speak up if they want to. They don't really have any chance to have input, and basically what will happen is you'll have the designated leader doing all the talking, and everyone just kind of sits back, doesn't do anything, and then, not only does the designated leader do all the talking, but they're having a lot of fun doing it. They love the fact that they are creating all the encounters. They're in control. They love having the control, this type of player. As I said, I think this is probably the worst type of player to have to deal with, especially as a group, I would say. I mean, it's tough as a GM, but there's actually a simple way to deal with this, and I'll go over that in a bit. But they are essentially showing the group that they don't care about them, that they don't care about the other people playing. But as I said, their side of it is, I want to have fun, and if no one else is going to be involved, then I'm going to do it for them. So this is how you control it. And like I said, it's pretty simple. So when you are in a situation, in an encounter, before opening up the conversation to players, so once you're done kind of explaining the situation, maybe you've introduced an NPC to the group, before you stop talking, you should pick out a character that is not the designated leader and ask them for their input on the situation. So if you're playing an NPC, maybe you go, you look at another character and say, oh, what's your name? I'm curious to hear what you think of the situation. That's it. That's all you really have to do. This shuts off the designated leader. They are not able to respond because they have not been addressed. If let's say you do this once, and then maybe the designated leader is a little upset, then let's say you do the same thing again to another player, and now the designated leader has not spoken for a long time. They're going to start getting a little annoyed because they're like, I'm not able to do anything now. So this is actually a good thing, in my opinion. It tells a designated leader that they need to calm down and that they need to allow the other players to be involved. So that's it. Just make sure to address other players instead of the leader. If this person continues to try to butt in, and let's say a player is, you've addressed another player and they start talking, and then the designated leader butts in and takes over the conversation, that's really bad, and you need to shut that down right away. So a good way to say this is to say, hey, it's great that you want to give your input, but we haven't heard from this person yet, so I want to hear what they think. So you are politely telling them to shut up, basically. Be nice about it, let them understand that they're being disrespectful, and if it keeps going, you need to probably set them aside and just have a conversation with them, like, hey, you have to stop taking control of sessions like this because you are stopping other players from doing it. If they complain or come back at you saying, like, hey, I'm not doing this, you just have to be firm, I think is important. So I apologize if anyone is this type of player, but I really do not like this play style at all. Next is the schemer. So this is a kind of a tough one to deal with, in my opinion. So these are the players that are always coming up with schemes and plans in order to get their way. So these types of players, they'll spend lots of time proposing ideas to the group or the GM, and most times these ideas are over the top or completely unfair. A lot of times they are cheating, technically. So and we'll go into why I think this is really difficult. So But first off, the reason why these players might do something like this, so similar to a murder hobo, these players are trying to win the game. They don't want to feel like they've lost. They don't want to feel like they're in a conflict that they can't control. So that is actually a big part of all of this. Is control is difficult in role playing games if you have players who maybe are adverse to having a GM kind of control a game. Maybe deep down they don't want to be told what's going on. They want to control. And if that's true, then let them GM another game. You know what I mean? So I think it's important to address the control thing, and also not to overstep or overuse your own control as a GM to punish players, because that is really negative. So if a player is trying to gain control of a situation and you basically as a GM shut everything down, or you punish an entire group because you want to show your dominance, then that's extremely bad and unhealthy to do. It's probably even worse than what all these players are doing. So you don't want to do that as a GM. You want to be understanding and reasonable with these types of situations. So back to what I was saying, this type of player wants to beat the GM or win the situation, instead of letting the storyline just kind of go and maybe something negative happens. That's going to be part of the story. That's what makes stories fun, in my opinion. And instead of letting that negative thing happen, they hold on to it and they try their best to beat it. And if they can't beat it, they keep talking and they keep thinking of ways that they can beat it. And this can waste lots of time. So this holds up the game in order to basically get the result that they want. Why it sucks, the main thing is it's a waste of time. You are spending so much time figuring out ways, scheming how you can defeat a situation, when really if you just let the situation play out, you'll get to the next part and maybe it'll be even more fun. So it's again, that kind of lack of control can drive some players crazy, and I understand that for sure. So the schemer is basically testing the GM to see what they can get away with, but the question is, does it really matter? Is that the point of why we're playing? We're not here to see what we can get away with and to cheat the rules. We're just here to tell a story, and as long as the GM is being reasonable and not like intentionally again punishing a group, there's no reason to be so confrontational whenever conflict happens. So it just holds up the group. How can you help to control this as a GM? Well, as I said, this one is a little bit harder to deal with, and it's because as a GM, the focus should be for the group to have fun. All right, that's what this is about. We're playing a game, and games are supposed to be fun. So having to tell a player that they can't do something over and over again might be kind of discouraging for them. They might start feeling like they're not having fun. But at the same time, you don't want things to get too out of hand. You don't want them to break the rules or break a situation or get such a crazy advantage that it just takes over, an entire session even. So you don't want things to get too out of hand, but you also want to make sure people are having a good time. So I think it's important to be firm with the players who are testing you, and you do have to just kind of say no a lot to them. You're going to have to keep denying them. Anytime they bring up something that you think is unfair or is cheating, you have to tell them no. And what'll happen is they'll try to compromise with you. You'll say no. They'll say, well, what if I do this instead? And if it's still unfair, then say no again. If they eventually get to a point where they're saying something that does sound reasonable, then kind of let it go and say, all right, that definitely works. But you are in control of the game. You need to set out the boundaries and the rules. If they keep asking for ridiculous advantages and you keep saying no and it doesn't stop, I'm sorry, I need to rephrase that. If they keep asking for ridiculous advantages and you keep saying no to them over and over again, they'll get the message eventually. You'll notice that a lot of these situations might end up in a player getting confrontational with you or pouting, being a little upset about it, but that's something they'll have to get over, there's no real explanation for that. So that is the schemer, very difficult one, but it's also very common, I would say. Next, we have the know-it-all. So, this is definitely something that I've done in the past, but at the same time, I wouldn't say I know so much about Star Wars or the lore of Star Wars that I am a complete expert, but there have been times when if I'll try to point out mistakes that people make, which is kind of not a good thing to do. So the problem with the know-it-all player is that the know-it-all player has studied pretty much every single aspect of the game. They know every ship, every species, and they probably have a general knowledge of everything about Star Wars. They are in love with Star Wars. It's a huge part of their life, and we'll go into that in the reason, but because of this, they like to point out every little mistake that the GM makes, and also mistakes that the group makes regarding like rules and whether the lore is accurate. If maybe you got a year wrong, it's actually 10 ABY instead of whatever, little things like that. They'll be real sticklers about, and it's just annoying. I mean, it's just super annoying. Just let it go, right? That's my main thing when I deal with it on the other end. But as I said, sometimes I'm the one initiating those types of things, so I definitely understand that in my playstyle. So, as I said, the reason that these players do this is that they just really love Star Wars. They are, it's probably a humongous part of their life. They love to nerd out over it. They love to go into the specifics about ships and the weapons they have and the different systems that are in, them, or it could be anything else. Maybe they know everything about a certain species. So, because of this, it's understandable that they might get a little excited, when the facts and rules are brought up. So, this is something that I kind of I understand where these players are coming from, and I don't ever want to tell a player to not be super official with their facts about Star Wars. If you know a lot about Star Wars, that's great. Go with that, and I encourage you to use your knowledge, to have a good time. So these players don't really mean harm. They just want to share their knowledge with people. But the reason it sucks is that not everyone will be as well versed in Star Wars as others, and that's something that you just have to make adjustments for as both a GM and a player when you are in a game. The storyline might not be super accurate if there are players who don't know the specifics of certain things. So you just have to let that go if it's bothering you, I think. So let's say a player messes up a bit of lore, or they call a ship by the wrong name. If the know-it-all calls them out for it, that player's going to now feel bad, and they're going to feel kind of guilty for not knowing enough about Star Wars. I've been in that situation before, especially when I started out playing SWRPG. That was my biggest worry, is that I don't know enough about Star Wars to keep up with the other players, and then I'll feel embarrassed when I make a mistake. So you don't want to do that, and this is the number one things that know-it-alls do. They embarrass other players, so that's not a good thing. And again, the same can go with the GM. Like I said, I'm not well versed in everything in Star Wars. I feel like I know a fair amount. Mainly, I like to say that I know the rules of this game more than the lore or the storylines of Star Wars. So I still learn every day, but about specific ships and planets and every species, I don't know everything about that. But it's great if other players do. So how do you control this? So this type of player just needs a reminder every now and then, in my opinion, that that the game is not about making sure that everything is accurate and canon. Sure, it's great. It probably helps this type of player be immersed in it if things are accurate in canon, so that's understandable. But at the same time, if other players are making mistakes, it's just going to be part of the story, and you have to let it go. That's just kind of how it works. So this game is about players who love Star Wars and they want to be able to have fun. So yeah, what if a player makes a mistake? It really does not matter. Do not try to control every little thing that a player does. Your fun is not more important than another player's fun. So if another player's version of having fun in this game is being cliche and sticking to tropes and maybe making mistakes, then they should be allowed to have that fun. So a good compromise for this is to encourage that player to nerd out over the things they want to nerd out about. If they want to talk about, again, a specific species at length in a session, let them do that. But if they are starting to force others to follow their own strict rules, then you need to put a stop to that. So that is the know-it-all player. And yeah, all of these are pretty common. I think this is one that pops up a lot, and I definitely understand where this type of player is coming from, as I said. All right, so we have 2 more now. The next one is the Contrarian. So this one happens in so many situations. And the Contrarian's main goal in the group is to basically just do the opposite of whatever everyone else wants to do. So let's say the group wants to go to one planet. The Contrarian will say, no, we should go to a different planet. The group wants to find a specific NPC. The Contrarian will say, no, we don't. I don't want to find this NPC. I want to do something else. So the reason that this happens is that these players just like to be difficult, whether they know it or not. Maybe they, I would say a lot of it is maybe they're unhappy with how the game is going. Maybe they don't like how the GM is running the game, or maybe they don't like the things that the group is doing. So instead of kind of telling people that or bringing it out there, they will passively be contrarian about it. So the other thing about this, which I think is very possible, and I've played this character quite a lot, is maybe they just enjoy playing the distant loner type of character who doesn't like to go along with the group. I think that's a fun character to play, the kind of mysterious guy. So I think that's totally fine. The main thing is not make sure that doesn't get too out of hand. Like if they don't want to follow the group, that's fine, but they still have to technically follow the group. They can't just be so contrarian that it's weighing the group down. So that's why this might happen. So why does this suck? So once again, this is a waste of time, and that's usually you'll have a couple hours for a session. So to be spending a lot of time having one person argue with the group about something is not really helpful. It just wastes a lot of time. So it's important for all the players to voice their opinions, but if one player is just disagreeing with everything, then they're not really putting any valuable input. They're just being difficult. So it's not constructive, and it's something that needs to be addressed. So how do you control this type of player? So if you are noticing a pattern and you notice that a player is disagreeing with everything that a group wants to do, you should first off ask them to state their case whenever they say something that is the opposite of the group. Let them explain why they want to do something. This might be a good way to catch a player who's a contrarian who maybe doesn't have an actual reason why they want to do something. If they're just being difficult, you might catch them stuttering, then you might catch them, kind of not coming up with a real solid answer as to why they do it. And that's a good way to kind of call them out, in my opinion, because they will probably understand like, oh, I didn't really have a reason I wanted to not do this. I just wanted to, be difficult. So, however, if they do have an opinion on a situation for a good reason, I think it's important that their opinion is heard, but that's all that matters. From there, if the group, let's say the group hears their opinion and then it actually influences them and they change their mind, then that's great. Then you have basically had a good, constructive conversation between your group. If your group then hears the opinion of the contrarian and then they continue with whatever plan they had in the first place, then that's just the way it is. That's the voice of the majority, after, and then the player just has to deal with it. So if it continues to be an issue, just keep telling the player that the majority of the group has decided, so you'll have to go along with it whether you like it or not. This type of situation will probably lead this type of character to pout or get angry or maybe even get even more contrarian, but deep down they know that they're wrong. That's just how they're expressing it. It's better than them getting their way, that is what I'll say. So make sure that this type of player doesn't always get their way. Again, always be nice about it, never kind of put them down, never make them feel guilty, but make sure that the rest of the group is not being put down by the player, so that's important. But this is tough. This is not an easy one to have to deal with. It's also one that's going to probably take some time for the individual to understand they need to stop doing it, or to just kind of bring it back a little bit, just kind of ease up the tension. Don't be contrarian about everything. Another thing that I do a lot, for sure, this type of thing. As I said, I like to play the distant loner type of character. I think it's kind of interesting to play that. So, okay. Now, we have the last one. And the last one is kind of I put 2 together because I think they kind of lead into each other a little bit. So, This one is the casual player slash the backseat player. So the casual player can basically present themselves in two ways, and that is either they, first of all, a casual player is someone who probably doesn't know much about Star Wars. Maybe they're a new player. Maybe their buddy who really loves this game, they invited them to play, and maybe they saw all the Star Wars movies a couple times. They're like, hey, you know what? I'll play some Star Wars. Who cares? So this is the type of player who doesn't take the game seriously, and we'll go into why this happens. The other type of casual player is someone who, because they don't know enough about Star Wars, they just take a back seat and they don't want to be confrontational. They don't want to embarrass themselves, so they just be quiet. And the reason this is kind of a dual thing is because this backseat player type also applies to shy players and quiet people, introverts. So the reason why this happens, so the casual player who doesn't take the game seriously will obstruct play by just being either really lazy with their role playing, or they resort to tropes and cliches in Star Wars. And they probably don't know as much about Star Wars, as I said. They probably are maybe a fish out of water. Maybe they feel a little uncomfortable with the fact that everyone else is so experienced. So they, in order to kind of cope with it, they just laugh it off, and they will probably cause some trouble. Because they want to fit in and they want to feel included. So their means of doing that is by cracking jokes and making people laugh. So that's how that player kind of expresses themselves in this game. The backseat player can also apply to casual players, like I said, but it can also just be people who are shy. So there might be people who've been playing this game for a long time and they're just shy and they're not comfortable with role playing, so they almost never speak. They often have lots of trouble with role playing. It's because they aren't comfortable with just talking in general. I know for me, role playing is still really tough because I don't feel I'm good at voices. So it's taken me some time to get there. So I would say the backseat player is another type that I am very strongly associated with. The thing about the backseat player is it's not really a difficult player, or it's not a negative thing. It's just something that kind of needs to be addressed, and you don't want to make a shy person feel bad about being shy, right? I think that's super important. Why does this suck? So the casual player who doesn't take the game seriously is frustrating to deal with because they can easily just derail situations, or they can take a creative idea that either the GM has put out there or another player, and they just turn it into like a boring trope, or they kind of ruin it by being silly and stupid. So they, again, just not taking things seriously enough. So that can be really, really frustrating to deal with. And when we go into how do you control these types of players, it's super simple. This is almost as simple as the second one that I did. I don't remember what it was. The designated leader. Yeah, so I think this is actually super simple on how to deal with this type of player. And we'll go into why that is. So, the backseat player is tough mainly because you want to make sure that they're having fun. So again, a backseat player isn't a negative thing. It's not something that you're trying to kind of scold someone about or make them feel or let them know that they're doing something wrong. You just want to make sure they're having fun because I think it's important for everyone to have a good time. With that being said, there might be some players who that's what they like. Maybe they like to just sit back and listen. I know I love to listen to other players roleplay. As a GM, I find myself just sitting back and listening quite a bit because I want to, hear what the players are doing and use my my storytelling skills to kind of go off of that. So I love to listen to people. I prefer to talking most of the time. So if a player likes to sit back and listen, then that's fine. And we'll go into how to figure that out. So that's the backseat player, the reason why it sucks. So again, it doesn't suck in a fact that affects the rest of the group. It sucks because it affects this person, that you're trying to make sure they are involved. Okay, so how do you control these types of players? So the number one rule with both of these types of players is that you need to individually engage them and force them to roleplay. That's why I think it's super simple. There's it's very easy to do. So so for the player who doesn't take the game seriously, my number one rule again is to make sure all players are having fun, and to ensure that all players are having fun, you have to let them enjoy Star Wars in the way that they want to enjoy it, because Star Wars means something different to every single person. I'm not going to love it as much as another person, and I'm probably going to love it a lot more than someone else who, you know, maybe casually enjoys it. So you need to make sure, however a player enjoys Star Wars and however a player wants to enjoy the game, that they are allowed to do that. So you don't want to ever stop a player from playing a certain way. I think that's the number one thing as a GM should not do, is stop players from playing a certain way. Instead, what you need to do is you need to engage them individually. So if that's what they want, if they want to use cliches and tropes and basically, you know, maybe use a limited knowledge that they have to roleplay, that's completely fine. Let them use what they have. However, if they are cracking jokes all the time, you need to, the best way to deal with that is to engage them with roleplay. So if you know someone is cracking jokes all the time, take an NPC, force them to go up to this player and ask them probing questions about a certain mission. Make them involved in the story. Don't let them kind of drift off into this thing, you know. But at the same time, if a player is the comic relief, that's great too, you know. But if it's affecting the game, or if it's getting a little old, then you want to try to address that. So ask them probing questions about a mission, or ask them to do something related to their career specialization. Whatever they chose, make sure that they are able to do those skills. So basically you're trying to focus their attention back on the game. You are redirecting them away from, you know, cracking the jokes. And the reason this is great is because it helps them learn. You know, they're not going to learn unless they role play. So that's how you deal with the player who doesn't take the game seriously. You have to force them to take it seriously, basically. So for the backseat player, it's very similar. If you notice that they are being really quiet, you should engage them separately. Ask them what they are doing, introduce an encounter to them, force them into a conversation. All of these things will give them role-playing practice and help them to learn how to play, and it will help them be comfortable eventually. Now for the backseat player, again, you don't want to be mean, you don't want to be rude about it or anything like that. And this is also something that could take a lot of time. You might notice in, let's say, the first session you try this, that maybe they give like 1 or 2 word answers. That's fine. Don't force them to do something if they aren't comfortable with it. But if you, in the first session, maybe you get some 1 word answers out of them, and then the second answer, maybe you get a couple sentences out of them, then that means that they're making progress and they're understanding how to play more. And you're also giving them the confidence to butt in, to go, you know, to butt into situations. If you have a designated leader in your group and you also have a backseat player, it can be very, very difficult, because you're basically letting the backseat player be even more of a backseat player because this other person is taking over every single conversation. So I think this is the reason I don't like designated leader players, because I tend to be backseat player in a lot of the games that I play. I think I do enjoy role playing and I like to be involved, but I also like to listen. So yeah, so if someone's taking over the conversation, it really bugs me. And going back into that conversation about the designated leader, one thing it's important, especially for like backseat players and quiet players, is a lot of the times it's not that they don't want to talk, it's that they just need a little bit of time to think. They need a little bit of time to figure out what's going on and what they want to say. Role-playing, improvising is something you have to train for. You can't, your brain will not just automatically be able to come up with these amazing role-playing things, or it also takes a lot of visualization to role-play. You have to be able to see what's happening in your mind, and you have to be able to react to it in a way that makes sense. So if you have a player who is very good at role-playing, or someone who is the designated leader and they're always butting in, then you should just give those players who are maybe being quiet, just give them time to think about what they want to do. And that's why I think listening is super important as a GM, because you can, again, you don't want to be the one taking it over either, especially if there's a lull, and then you feel your role is to kind of butt back in as a GM. One thing you can also do is if it's being quiet, just throw in a little hint or a little kind of motivator to be like, well, you could do, you know, X if you want to. Kind of give them some suggestions, and that'll kind of get the wheels turning. So yeah, it's important to allow players to have time to think about what they want to do, because improvising is not easy. So there you go. That was very long-winded. I knew this was going to be a long video, but I hope this has helped you. I know that me kind of thinking about these roles, I did, Murder Hobo is like a well-known type of player, but I did kind of come up with these on my own, and thinking about how to deal with this has actually helped me a lot, and I think I'll use a lot of these in the future as a GM. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you do have any other maybe player types that you can think of, feel free to post them. As I said, there are probably many other types of conflicts and problems that have come up that I didn't go over, so feel free to let me know about those. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.